In 2006, French media mogul Daniel Filipacchi paid $7 million for what he believed was a masterpiece by surrealist painter Max Ernst. The painting, titled The Forest, depicted a sun rising over a grove of cypress trees. Ernst's own widow, Dorothea Tanning, saw the canvas and declared it the most beautiful picture her late husband had ever painted. There was just one problem. Max Ernst never touched it. The painting was the work of Wolfgang Beltracchi, a German artist who would become known as the most prolific art forger in modern history. Over the course of 35 years, Beltracchi created an estimated 300 counterfeit paintings attributed to more than 50 different artists. His fakes hung in prestigious museums. They sold through Christie's and Sotheby's. They fooled world-renowned experts, and they generated more than $100 million before a single tube of white paint brought his entire empire crashing down. This is the story of the greatest art fraud of the century. Wolfgang Fischer was born on February 4, 1951, in Höxter, a small town in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. He grew up in Geilenkirchen, surrounded by art from his earliest years. His father worked as a church muralist and art restorer who supplemented his income by producing copies of works by Rembrandt, Picasso, and other masters. The elder Fischer taught his son to paint, and the boy proved remarkably talented. According to Beltracchi's own account, at age 14, he created a convincing imitation of a Picasso from the artist's blue period in a single day. His father was astonished, but Wolfgang showed little interest in formal education. He was expelled from secondary school at 17 and later enrolled in art school in Aachen, though he rarely attended classes. Instead, he embraced what he later called his hippie period. Throughout the 1970s, he grew his hair long, experimented with LSD and opium, rode motorcycles across Europe, and spent a year and a half living on a beach in Morocco. He drifted through Amsterdam, Barcelona, Paris, and London, surviving by buying and selling paintings at antique markets and flea markets. During this period, Beltracchi began producing small-scale forgeries. He didn't copy existing paintings. Instead, he created new works in the style of old masters, selling them as undiscovered pieces. It was a skill that would eventually make him millions. In the 1980s, he briefly ran an art gallery with a business partner. The arrangement ended badly, with the partner accusing Beltracchi of stealing paintings. Beltracchi has always denied the accusation. Everything changed in 1992 when Beltracchi met Helene, a woman who would become not just his wife, but his most essential accomplice. They married in 1993, and Wolfgang took her surname. Together, they would transform his sporadic forgery work into a systematic, multi-million-dollar enterprise. The genius of their scheme wasn't just Wolfgang's technical skill. It was the elaborate provenance they manufactured to make buyers believe in the authenticity of his paintings. Helene claimed that her grandfather, Werner Jägers, had been a wealthy industrialist in Cologne during the 1920s. According to the story, Jägers had befriended Alfred Flechtheim, a prominent German Jewish art dealer who ran galleries in Düsseldorf and Berlin. When Hitler rose to power, Flechtheim was forced to flee Germany. Before leaving, he supposedly sold a cache of valuable paintings to Jägers for a nominal sum. The collection had then been hidden during World War II and passed down through the family until it reached Helene. It was a compelling narrative that explained why these previously unknown masterpieces were suddenly appearing on the market. But the story had critical flaws that no one bothered to investigate. Werner Jägers had been a member of the Nazi Party in the 1930s. The idea that he would have befriended a Jewish art dealer was historically implausible, but buyers and dealers wanted to believe. These lost paintings were too beautiful, too exciting, and too profitable to question. Wolfgang Beltracchi didn't simply copy existing paintings. He created entirely new works that fit seamlessly into an artist's body of work. He would identify gaps in an artist's catalog, sometimes finding references to paintings that were documented as lost but had no known reproductions. Then he would create those paintings from scratch. His research was exhaustive. He studied the artists obsessively, reading everything he could find about their lives, their methods, their materials. He visited the locations they painted. He learned not just how they applied paint to canvas, but how they thought, how they saw the world. The technical execution was equally meticulous. Beltracchi sourced period-appropriate canvases and frames from flea markets across Europe. He would buy worthless old paintings simply to reuse their stretchers and frames. He tucked dust and dirt into the crevices of frames to simulate age. He employed techniques the original artists had used, such as rubbing a spatula over textured objects placed beneath the canvas to create specific effects. Most critically, he mixed his own paints using period-correct pigments. He understood that modern materials would betray a forgery under scientific analysis, so he went to extraordinary lengths to ensure his pigments matched what would have been available when the supposed original was painted. The attention to detail extended to documentation. Wolfgang created fake labels indicating the paintings came from the Sammlung Flechtheim, the Flechtheim collection. He produced intentionally blurry, overexposed photographs on pre-World War II photo paper showing what appeared to be Helene's grandmother posing in a room with the paintings hanging in the background. The woman in those photographs wasn't Helene's grandmother. It was Helene herself, dressed in period-appropriate clothing, photographed by Wolfgang in carefully staged scenes. The Beltracchi's operation expanded throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s. They moved from Germany to the south of France, where Wolfgang continued painting while Helene orchestrated sales through galleries and auction houses. The scheme also involved two other accomplices. Otto Schulte-Kellinghaus helped place forgeries on the market. He contributed his own family provenance story, claiming his grandfather, Johann Wilhelm Knops, had also been an art collector in the 1920s. Helene's sister Jeanette was also involved in the operation. The paintings Wolfgang produced weren't just good enough to fool buyers, they were good enough to fool the world's leading experts. Werner Spies, the former director of the Centre Pompidou in Paris and the foremost authority on Max Ernst, personally authenticated several Beltracchi forgeries. Spies traveled to the Beltracchi's home in France to inspect the forest in early 2004. He was so impressed that he immediately certified it as genuine and later included it in his Max Ernst catalog Raisonné. The painting was sold to a company called Salomon Trading for 1.8 million euros. It then passed to a Paris gallery, Cazo Beraudière, which sold it to Daniel Filipacchi for approximately $7 million. One of Beltracchi's Max Ernst forgeries even hung for months as part of a retrospective at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The victims of Beltracchi's fraud read like a who's who of the art world. In July 2004, American actor and comedian Steve Martin paid $860,000 for a painting called Landscape with Horses, supposedly by Heinrich Campendonk. Martin had no idea it was fake. In February 2006, he sold the painting through Christie's to a Swiss businesswoman for $500,000, taking a loss but still believing it genuine. Daniel Filipacchi, the French media mogul, lost $7 million on The Forest too. The Hilty Art Foundation, run by Liechtenstein billionaire Michael Hilty, purchased a fake André Derain titled Matisse Peignant à Couleur for 4.5 million euros. A Maltese company called Trasteco paid 2.88 million euros for Red Picture with Horses, a supposed Campendonk, through the Lempert's auction house in Cologne. Museums were fooled as well. The Max Ernst Museum in Brühl displayed Beltracchi's La Forêt as part of its collection. A museum in Tokushima, Japan, purchased what it believed was a Jean Metzinger painting from an acclaimed cycling series. The fraud wasn't discovered until 2024. 5 or 6 of Beltracchi's Campendonk forgeries ended up in an official catalog raisonné of the artist's work, compiled by a scholar in Bonn who had no idea he was authenticating fakes. Wolfgang Beltracchi's downfall came from the one detail he overlooked. Sometime in the early 2000s, while working on Red Picture with Horses, a painting he would attribute to Heinrich Campendonk and date to 1914, Beltracchi ran out of the zinc he used to create white paint. Rather than source the correct historical pigment as he always had, he purchased a tube of zinc white from a Dutch manufacturer. What Beltracchi didn't know was that the manufacturer had added titanium white to the pigment without listing it on the label. Titanium white wasn't used as a paint pigment until the 1920s. It would not have existed in any painting created in 1914. The painting sold through Lempert's auction house in November 2006 for €2.88 million to Tresteco. But the new owners grew suspicious and commissioned a forensic analysis. In 2008, Nicholas Eastaugh, a specialist in the technical analysis of art, examined the painting. His findings were damning. The paint contained traces of titanium white. The painting could not possibly be from 1914. Further investigation uncovered additional problems. Campendonk's authentic paintings extended around the edges of the frame, but Beltracchi's went only to the edge of the canvas. The supposed wormholes in the frame were actually just holes poked straight through with a nail, lacking the irregular pattern of actual worm damage. The canvas had been sanded too aggressively. X-rays revealed an earlier composition underneath. The distribution of fatty acids didn't match the normal drying process for a painting of that age. Once investigators knew what to look for, they began examining other paintings from the Fleckheim collection. Ralph Jentsch, an expert on Alfred Fleckheim's gallery, recognized that the labels Beltracchi had created were themselves forgeries. The house of cards collapsed. Early in the morning on August 27, 2010, 5 police vans surrounded the Beltracchi's car as they were leaving their home in Freiburg. Wolfgang later described the scene as being like Miami Vice. Wolfgang and Helene Beltracchi were arrested that day. Otto Schulte-Kellinghaus was arrested on December 1, 2010. The investigation, led by René Allange of the Berlin State Criminal Office, uncovered a fraud far larger than anyone had initially suspected. Police ultimately identified 58 paintings they believed were Beltracchi forgeries. Wolfgang himself claimed to have forged works by more than 50 different artists over 35 years. The trial began in autumn 2011 at the Cologne Regional Court. Originally, prosecutors planned to call more than 160 witnesses and 10 expert witnesses, but the defendants struck a deal. In exchange for lighter sentences, Wolfgang Beltracchi admitted to forging 14 specific paintings, 3 by Heinrich Campendonk, 2 by André Derain, 1 by Kees van Dongen, 5 by Max Ernst, 1 by Fernand Léger, and 2 by Max Pechstein. The prosecutor estimated that these 14 paintings alone had generated profits of €16 million. On October 27, 2011, after a 40-day trial, the court delivered its verdict. Wolfgang Beltracchi was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Helene received 4 years. Otto Schulte-Kellinghaus got 5 years. Helene's sister Jeanette received a 21-month suspended sentence. All 4 were ordered to pay millions in restitution. The Beltracchi's punishment struck many observers as remarkably lenient. Wolfgang and Helene were allowed to serve their sentences in an open prison, meaning they could leave during the day as long as they maintained regular employment. A friend provided them jobs at a photo studio. Each morning, they left the prison. Each evening, they returned. Wolfgang continued to create art while serving his sentence, collaborating with a photographer on mixed media works that incorporated photographs of himself. Helene was released from prison in February 2013. Wolfgang was freed on January 9, 2015, having served just over 3 years of his 6-year sentence. His pre-trial detention counted toward time served. Berlin investigator René Allange boycotted the sentencing, declining to comment on the verdict, but noting that similar criminals faced much more severe punishment. The art world, meanwhile, scrambled to assess the damage. Werner Spies, the Max Ernst expert who had authenticated multiple forgeries, faced a lawsuit from a buyer who had purchased Tremblement de Terre for $1.1 million at Sotheby's in 2009. In 2013, a French court ordered Spies to pay approximately €650,000 in damages. However, in December 2015, the Versailles Court of Appeal overturned that ruling, finding that an author of a catalogue raisonné who expresses an opinion outside of a specific sales transaction cannot be held to the same liability as an expert consulted during a sale. Lempert's auction house was ordered to reimburse Trasteco €2.88 million for the fake Campendonk. The case was eventually settled in December 2012, with some of Beltracchi's real estate being sold to repay €2 million. Burkhard Leismann, director of the Kunstmuseum Aalen, was charged in 2013 with being an accomplice in the attempted sale of a fake Fernand Léger while knowing it was fake. He denied the charges, and the case was closed in 2014 after he paid a €7,500 fine. Since his release, Wolfgang Beltracchi has not retreated into obscurity. He has embraced his notoriety, transforming himself from convicted forger into celebrity artist. He now paints under his own name, with some works selling for over $80,000. He has held exhibitions across Europe. In 2014, German filmmaker Arne Birkenstock released a documentary about him, Beltracchi, The Art of Forgery, which won the German Film Award for Best Documentary Film. Birkenstock's father, Reinhard, was Beltracchi's lawyer. Wolfgang and Helene published an autobiography and a collection of letters they wrote to each other while in prison. In 2021, Wolfgang launched an NFT series called The Greats, recreating Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi in the styles of 7 different old masters. Today, the Beltracchis live and work on Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. According to the BBC, Wolfgang continues to make millions from selling his original works. Beltracchi shows little remorse for his crimes. In interviews, he has suggested that the auction houses and dealers were no less culpable than he was. They let him fool them, he argues, because they profited from believing. As for the forgeries still in circulation, Beltracchi has said most of the 300 paintings he claims to have created have not been revealed. "My art is everywhere," he told CBS News, "in many museums and private collections." Whether that claim is true or an exaggeration is impossible to verify, but art experts acknowledge that Beltracchi forgeries almost certainly remain hanging in galleries and private homes around the world, undetected, appreciated for their beauty even if their authorship is a lie. The Wolfgang Beltracchi case exposed fundamental weaknesses in the art market, a system built on expertise, reputation, and trust that proved shockingly vulnerable to someone willing to exploit it. Beltracchi succeeded not just because he was technically skilled. He succeeded because buyers wanted to believe. Auction houses wanted the commissions, dealers wanted the sales, collectors wanted to own masterpieces, and experts, whose reputations depended on their ability to authenticate great art, wanted to be the ones to discover lost treasures. In this environment of collective desire, Beltracchi's fabricated provenances were accepted without sufficient scrutiny. His fake photographs weren't examined closely. The historical implausibility of a Nazi Party member befriending a Jewish art dealer was overlooked. Everyone involved had an incentive to believe, and so they did. The scandal prompted calls for reform in the art authentication process, greater reliance on scientific analysis, and more rigorous investigation of provenance claims. But as former forger John Myatt told reporters, pulling off such a scheme is just as easy today. As recently as 2024, forgeries by Beltracchi were still being discovered in Japan, more than a decade after his conviction. Wolfgang Beltracchi remains a polarizing figure. To some, he is a talented artist who revealed the hypocrisy and greed of the art establishment. To others, he is a criminal who caused immense financial harm and corrupted art history itself. Misrepresenting the authorship of works, observed James Martin, a leading fine art detective who examined Beltracchi's work, is a bit like unleashing a virus on art history, collections, and markets that can damage common knowledge and reputation and cost dearly. Martin added, "I remain impressed by his skills and disappointed by his choices. Perhaps that's the most fitting epitaph for the greatest art forger of our time." a man whose extraordinary talents were matched only by his willingness to deceive everyone who trusted him.